ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed your tea break. Thank you so much for that engaging discussion on buildings, and we will now shift our focus to another crucial sector that is both hard to abate and highly significant in the ASEAN region, textiles and apparel. This sector accounts for roughly 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and ASEAN stands out as one of the world's key manufacturing hubs, supplying major brands across the globe. So Prof. Switzer already pointed out the emission distribution across the value chain, and it becomes clear that the production stages, particularly the so-called wet treatment stage, which includes dyeing and finishing, offers the greatest opportunities to reduce emissions. And the working groups examined various existing solutions across this value chain, such as recycled materials, or process electrification, or new business models, as well as recycling methods. But if there are already several effective solutions available, why is there so little progress in decarbonizing this industry? When examining the different obstacles to adoption in the textile and apparel industry, 4 major challenges emerged. First, the industry is characterized by low margins and an intense cost competition. And even if some solutions bring long-term cost savings, who will bridge the gap for upfront costs and long-term cost savings? Second, sustainability is often not the top priority for customers who might focus more on price or the aesthetics of the product. Engaging and bringing together all stakeholders is also crucial to drive change. However, the current regulatory focus in this industry, as we heard earlier, is often on other relevant ESG topics, such as labor issues or the use of harmful chemicals. Small brands in particular face significant challenges in driving change, and overall, as we also heard for the building sector, the data availability, especially at the scope 3 level, is very limited. Last but not least, as long the energy grid isn't greener, it doesn't help us to electrify all processes to decarbonize this industry. So to tackle these obstacles, the working group came up with different recommendations ranging from financial support from brands for their shared supply chains, investment incentives for equipment upgrades, consumer education to nudge behavior towards buying fewer or high-quality pieces, coordination of government efforts across the different ESG areas, support of lower minimum order quantities, which especially supports smaller brands, standardization of data collection across the supply chain, and last but not least, power purchasing agreements to broaden the adoption of renewable energy. May I invite the second panel to come on stage and discuss these obstacles in more detail. In this panel, we have Mr. Eric Nietzsche, Head of ESG and ESG Research and Integration at Manulife. Dawn McGregor, Business Engagement Lead at China Water Risk. Ms. Claudia Chang, co-founder of Butterbee Active. Ms. Tan Hui Chi, Director of Sustainability at the Singapore Fashion Council, and Ms. Patak Ape Vijay, Associate Professor at Nanyang Business School.
So we have the unenviable position of giving a panel at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I want to start with just a very quick story to try and get people engaged. And that's, in my role, people often ask me, what can I do to reduce my carbon footprint? And I kind of say, that's an important question, but you should really think about what you should be a part of to collectively reduce emissions. And so one example of that is about a year ago, there were a couple of friends who were saying, we're going to all these climate conferences and everyone gets upset and then they get hopeful and they talk and then they leave and nothing gets implemented. There's not enough action that's taken. And I think everyone agrees at a high level, but we need to focus on more kind of what's obstructing the action, and how we can take tangible steps. And so maybe a better approach would be, before a panel like this, if we have workshops and we bring together industry practitioners and then present. And so that's Matt and Tim. And I think if you look around the room, if you think about what can be accomplished in a year in terms of bringing people together, that's a pretty great example. So how about a round of applause just for that? And so, as Prof. Switzer said, I want to start with really an invitation to hear from the industry practitioners and to think about what tangible actions you can take away. Think about what, you can learn from their experience and take away and kind of implement in your organization. So with that, if I can ask everyone to give a quick introduction, we'll just go down the line.
Yeah, good afternoon all. I'm Abhay Pathak. I have recently joined NTU as Associate Professor Practice. Prior to this, I worked with the industry for 30 years, particularly in the manufacturing sector, that too including fashion industry. In my last assignment, I was also part of UNFCCC Fashion Industry Charter. Like Professor Adam has mentioned about the Fashion Pact, there is a fashion industry charter by UNFCCC, and I was on the steering committee of that. I look forward for further discussion here. Glad to be part of this. Thank you.
Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hui Chi, aka HC. I am the Sustainability Director from Singapore Fashion Council. First of all, thanks to the invitation from NBS for having us joining this forum, and we truly look forward to having a very fruitful discussion. But before I pass the ball to the next speaker, I would like to ask how many of you are actually coming from fashion industry? Related or in direct relation or indirect relation? Thank you so much. So just a sharing on my personal experience, I am actually an engineer by training. I'm not a fashion designer, so that means that I try to connect my left brand to right brand. So left-right balance. So look forward, thank you.
Hi, okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Claudia. I come from Butterbean Active. We're a local activewear business that is on a mission to encourage more people to enjoy the happiness out of moving your body instead of pursuing goals in performance or body transformation. As you can see from my profile picture, me and my partner, we are big enthusiasts in hikers and trail running. So that's the very origin where we got the inspiration to start our own activewear line. And because of the root in our love for the nature, we have strived to build a business based on sustainability from our day one. So some of the efforts that we take include using recycled materials, upcycle materials, and use all the more environmental friendly packaging materials and all other small stuff that we try to use. As we have discussed earlier, it's definitely not easy for any fashion brand or any, let alone a smaller fashion brand to start to try to be sustainable in business. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion we'll have later to see if we can do anything to tackle some of the challenges.
Hi everyone, Dawn from CWR, and we are a think tank headquartered in Hong Kong, and there's a few of us in Singapore. And we help business and investors unpack kind of the complex and interlinked water risks and the related risks, which then brings in climate risks. And because water is how we're going to feel a lot of the climate impacts. And so through that, there's also the water energy nexus, and we do it across sectors, one of which is textiles, and that's why I'm here today. And just to say, I think it's great that there's textile panel at Decarb Forum, because as we've heard already today, you know, there's always the hard to abate. There's always the energy, the steel, the cement. I've rarely seen a non-textile event have textiles on the agenda, so great to see that.
And Eric Nietzsche, I lead the Sustainable Investment Team at Manulife Investment Management, and lead that for our business in Asia. So if we can go, let me see if I can find the recommendations. So if I can ask the panel to kind of elaborate on these recommendations and maybe give a bit of experience of what it's like kind of thinking about these in practice. So Huichi, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eric. So to me, before we actually dive into recommendation, what is popping in my mind right now is stakeholders mapping. So B2B, B2G, and B2C. So what we can actually add value in between business to business, whereby the business to business stakeholders are actually including raw material suppliers, Tier 4, they're including Tier 3, Tier 2, Tier 1 in the value chain, and they're including brand owners like many fast fashion or ultra fast fashion brands, and that including, no, that is all B2B, right? They're including solutions provider, and they're including technology providers as well. So B2C is somewhere along brand owners with their consumer, how can they actually package sustainability message and flawedly deliver the message to their consumers. I mean, more importantly is to prevent the greenwashing, whereby we always talk about greenwashing, especially in sustainability for fashion. So this is B2C. So what about B2G? I think that is especially important in an Asian context, because right now, like in comparison to other regions like EU, they are actually advancing the discussion, coming to have about EPR for fashion, EPR for textile, and some other like digital product passport. These could be some of the policies could be enhanced by the local jurisdiction or by the local policy makers. So how business as a collective effort work together to lobby, I would say to influence government in the decision making in order to have a new policy coming out to regulate the circulation of fashion. So that's very important, B2B, B2C, and also B2G. So on from Singapore Fashion Council, we have one very important mandate, which is to convene every stakeholders in the ecosystem to make an impact. And that is why Singapore Fashion Council, we have this vision. We want to drive Asia, especially Singapore, as an Asia regional hub for responsible fashion. So when we call responsible fashion is actually that including sustainability, that including decarbonization, that including diversity, that including inclusion, and etc. So we are putting a lot of focus, especially on the upstream and downstream. Downstream, how we can increase the awareness among the consumers to help them to understand how they can actually make their clothing last longer. So this is one part of our education mandate. And we also have a lot of community outreach to our neighborhood communities to increase the awareness about how to actually maintain and also make your clothes to be used longer, and also reduce the buying. I mean, reduce buying to me personally is quite difficult because it's personal choice, right? Especially with the proliferation of social media right now. Yeah, I think we are trying our best at every level, that including point 6. We are moving towards point 6 to some sort of thinking and also planning ahead how we can actually harmonize the current standards for fashion. So a lot of standards are happening in the fashion right now. That including, of course, ISO is actually the general standard that we are following, and also GHG protocol in the carbon footprint calculation. But could we actually have something that is related to fashion and related to textile? Because in view of this, in light of the textile is actually comparing to building, textile is actually a low value item. And we only use it for the maximum of 10 years, not like building. Once we have built, the building can actually last for 99 years here, at least. So I think it is very complex, and it's a complex but very optimistic about the moving forward, about the change moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think the industry organizations they have a good place to play on standards, influencing consumer behavior, and thinking about kind of collective supply chains. Claudia, can you expand on that from a manufacturer's perspective?
Yeah, of course. But before diving into the supply chain side, I just wanted to echo back to what we as a brand can do to nudge the consumers into the right direction. One thing we definitely should not do is to try to stand at a higher ground to educate the customers to say you should do this or you should do that. I think we should do it very delicately. There's a very careful way for us to do it. But there was one observation from this past weekend we had, because we ran a pop-up event outside of Yongan City this past weekend as one of the vendors. And we put our products out there. We had some signs out there to indicate the characteristics of each product. So for the recycled material part, we had two signs. One says, I'm made of recycled material. Nobody watched that. Nobody cared for it. And the other sign saying, I am made of post-consumption plastic bottles. A lot of people stopped and they were like, wow, this is amazing. How do you make plastic bottles into clothes? So I think it's, as you said, it's really about how we package the story, how we package the marketing materials into stories that can intrigue the interest, can get people excited about it. So this is something that we as a brand, we are constantly testing and trying to do, and I think maybe we can also learn from all the industry peers on how to do it. But then what is really a great challenge for us as a brand is more on the supply chain side. Just one of the biggest challenges me and my partner had when we just started out on the Butterbean journey, because either of us is from textile or fashion industry. I'm from a financial service background. I had no idea how fabric is made in the beginning. But we wanted to use recycled materials. So we went on a long journey, email after email, testing after testing. Finally, we settled on a fabric supplier, a reputable one, who is willing to provide a lower minimum order quantity for the recycled material. And they're charging a premium for it. We're like, okay, fine, premium, we can deal with it. And then we proceeded with it. And when the delivery date was about to come, we were so excited, yay, finally, our first batch of fabric. And then we got a part of the fabric, because for stretchy fabrics that are used to make sports bras or leggings, they're supposed to be stretchy, supportive. And the first batch of fabric we got, they're so loose. You put them on, they're like long johns. So there's no way we can make any products out of that fabric, right? So later on, we actually learned that the quality defect is part of the issue that's very common with small order quantities, because when the fabric mill, they make fabrics, especially for the stretchy fabric, after the fabric is knitted from the yarns, they need to go through a processing stage, and the parameters of the machines for the processing need to be set specifically for each fabric. So there's a test and error stage which usually happens to the first, 100 yards of the fabric. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone is more familiar with the fabric mills than me. So with our ordering quantity, probably just a few hundred or a few thousand yards, it's actually not that uncommon to see the first couple of hundred of yards that have quality issues. So when this thing happened, and then we had to redo that particular small batch of fabric, which ended up causing more waste to the environment, which was not something we wanted to see. So when that incident happened, it really intrigued me, like, why don't we have a more flexible solution to smaller brands like ourselves? I don't know, maybe a crowdsourcing platform hosted by, I don't know, maybe a fabric mill or any third party, where we can order smaller quantities, but still they gather, the mills can gather all the demands and then still be able to manage to to produce in larger quantities to make sure the fabric meets the quality requirements. So this is something that's really intriguing me to think about. But so far, I don't think we have, at least we haven't seen any solutions like that. But I think it's really, I would really encourage anybody from our textile industry to maybe brainstorm on it, because with this kind of solution, more smaller brands will be able to order the recycled or more sustainable fabrics that we wanted to use. And with the larger quantity producing, the cost for the fabrics will come down, and then brands that are on the fence, maybe because of the higher cost, will also adopt the more sustainable materials. So, but I know there's a lot of obstacles, there's a lot of roadblocks, a lot of challenges posing to the actual execution of the process. But we would be happy to work with our industry association, our peers on that.
Allow me to chime in. I'm just wondering, this would be interesting to also raise this question. How many of you know what is the textile to textile recycling rate on a global basis? Textile to textile recycling. On a global basis, only 1%. So whichever or wherever we see is actually made by recycled material, most of them are coming from plastic, PET. From plastic bottles. So textile to textile recycling right now is still within 1%. So there is really a figure that we can actually keep talking on. How do we encourage textile to textile recycling and reuse?
Yeah.
Thank you, Claudia.
Especially textile to textile recycling, I think one of the biggest hurdles right now is a lot of the fabrics are not made of one single material. For example, for the legging material is polyester or nylon plus spandex. A lot of the cotton t-shirts are cotton plus polyester or any other material. So if it's single material, it's a lot easier to reuse. That's my understanding. If it's mixed with something else, almost impossible. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, we are having, right now in the market, we have many different technologies that treating the textile to textile recycling. That including mechanical recycling is actually the basic. It's really the basic. It's the easiest, mechanical recycling. And most of the mechanical recycling actually recycle cotton, 100% cotton. Then we have chemical recycling. Then also we have enzymatic recycling, biorecycling. So there are many technologies right now. So the challenge right now is, I think it's still, how do we actually scale the innovation into technology? I think that is the point, because I think earlier on, Prof. Matt also mentioned that it's really the economic value. So one recycled product and another one is actually using the virgin material. Virgin material is much cheaper than the recycled product. Why would people want to choose your recycled product over the other, like using the virgin material?
That was one of my takeaways from the kind of workshop discussions, was this issue of how much more difficult the blending of fibers makes the recycling. And that if you were to be able to undo that a bit, then it also potentially unlocks all sorts of other kind of decarbonization gains that you could have around using sustainable approaches to organic fibers and raw materials. Don, could you come in on that, just on the kind of the thoughts on the supply chain side?
Yep. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back first, because I think, as you can see from the discussion, we can pick up from lots of different points and go down rabbit holes. You know, we can talk about recycling, mixed fiber. Even single fiber shirts are really hard to recycle, and you need to do like a life cycle assessment to determine if it's actually beneficial to recycle that, or downcycle, so on. And this is the issue with textiles. So we heard the buildings panel, and there was, the word hope, that Professor Switzer used. There is hope in buildings. It's big assets, you can have big gains, and the decisions are done at a bigger scale. Textiles, you're a small brand. It's hard, and then there's the brands, and at the moment, they're dominated by fast fashion, a lot of them consumers. Then there's the consumers. We're now accustomed to not just 4 fashion cycles in a year, but 52 or more. There's new products coming in every day in the clothes, in the shops. And people want to buy $5, $10 t-shirts. So they don't want to change that. The brands, they want to keep their margins, although low. And then there's the manufacturers, who they need like a long-term signal from brands and from consumers to be able to decarbonize, to be able to be better on water. And so this is an industry that's going to be very hard to decarbonize, actually. And like with all the brains, and we're at a university, I thought I'd just put it out there, like, you're the brains of tomorrow. Like, we need to be thinking about these complex ones, use the word complex, and for you, we need solutions that work at smaller ones, smaller brands. And to go to supply chains, so the big brands, H&M and them, they have preferential contracts with suppliers, manufacturers, and that's nothing new. And that's like if they meet certain environmental, carbon, water, chemical KPIs, they get longer contracts, higher volumes. But that isn't pushing the needle enough. So this is also a sector with a lot of solutions, apparently, but it's not changing. It's not changing fast enough, and given the climate crisis, it's just not enough. So yeah, not very helpful. We specialize in risk, so I'm putting it out there, the problems and the risks. You guys can solve it, yeah, and I'm hot.
So with that, I'm going to quickly deflect to Prof. Bertha. You have an incredible experience working through some of these issues practically in Vietnam. Can you share some of that?
Yeah. I would like to address 2 key challenges that supply chain or manufacturers are facing. One is the regulatory challenge, and second is financial challenge. See, coming to first regulatory challenge, particularly for decarbonization, we know that renewable energy is one of the major key levers for decarbonization. Now, the suppliers or the manufacturers in these countries, I mean Vietnam or Indonesia, they are very much pro for installation of rooftop solar. But the government authorities are actually in different pockets. I'm not saying it is throughout the country, the situation is like that, but there are different industrial zones. So some of the industrial zones are not allowing industries to put up the rooftop solar. That is the clear situation today. So why industries are looking forward for rooftop solar is because that is their interest as well, because the renewable energy cheaper, they can also improve their productivity and profitability. So they are also looking forward, but there is a regulatory challenge in that. Of course, there is another challenge, which I will discuss later. Another thing is coming to financial challenge. See, the other major lever in decarbonization, we say for textile industry, is phasing out of coal. So in textile industry, lot of the industry uses coal boilers. And now, if we have to switch on to biomass or any other clean fuel, we need to change the boilers. So there are 2 again aspects. One is capex. Capex is involved. Second thing is there is also an impact on the OPEX, operational cost. Now, even if the supplier, say, takes care of the capex, the operational cost will increase the cost of even produce with the change in the biomass or biomass transition or any other clean gas. So as we discussed earlier, as Karen has mentioned, it is a low margin and very cost competitive sector. So even for 1 cent increase in the produce, there is a lot of deliberation that happens between brands and suppliers. It takes months and years actually to settle the cost of an article. So there also, I mean, from the brand point of view, I think brands can play a huge role. One, from the regulatory point of view, they can influence the policies, the renewable energy policies for securing renewable energy for their supply chain, because they are bringing good FDI to those countries, so they can actually intervene policies and facilitate RE securing in the supply chain. That is one. Second thing is, they also need to internalize the cost of emissions into the product. Because already if the supplier is actually making it very cost competitive and he has no scope further. So there has to be internalization of the cost of emission that is to be done. So that is also something that brands can do. So from that point of view, I think brands have a huge role to play in this driving decarbonization in supply chain in different countries. Even from the regulation point of view, even if you take a case of Indonesia, if we have to put up, or supplier has to put up the rooftop solar, the PLN doesn't allow the capacity of the rooftop solar beyond 15% of the consumption. So in fact, I had planned a 14 megawatt peak rooftop solar, but I had to scale it down to 4 megawatt peak because the government authorities are not giving the approval for the higher capacities, which depending on the rooftop that is available. So these are the various challenges that we have. We can discuss more depending on the time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I think, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you so much. I can actually echo and also resonate with Prof regarding to the OPEX and CAPEX. And right now, I think moving forward, we shall also talk about the TCO, total cost of ownership. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that if we look at the emissions breakdown, and you'll notice that the use phase here is about a quarter. In the slide that we saw earlier, it was only a few percent. It depends on basically whether you include the washing machines and the cleaning of the textile as part of the emissions. And that to me makes a lot of intuitive sense. If you think about the power that we consume, in apartments, the power of a washing machine over the 10 years of owning a textile. But that plus the other electrification probably takes care of about half of the emissions if it was coming from green power. And so we need to call out that that's a huge opportunity for decarbonizing this sector, and it's very similar for a lot of other sectors, but that's not really what we focused on in this work, because you could argue whether that's kind of in scope or out of scope for the textile and apparel industry. So when the guidebooks come out, you'll see more focus on the recommendations and the actions in the other areas. And that's also true for other environmental and social topics. We were kind of focusing on decarbonization. So I think in the interest of time, I want to ask the panelists for kind of final thoughts, recommendations, kind of takeaways for the audience. And maybe we'll just go down the line quickly, starting with Dawn.
I think it's to have more discussions around textiles in more mainstream decarbonization talks. And because of the complex nature, which I spoke to you a little bit about, and the dynamics on achieving that, we need people from different sectors as well. And so for our working group call, it's really interesting. We do a bit on textiles, but that's not like we do cross-sector work. But you were on the call, like all of us were on these working group calls, and that's what made them really useful, because we had the finance guys, and that's always an issue, when you're looking to do any work, but especially for decarbonizing and getting that financing. So I would say it's to keep having conversations, not just textiles, but other sectors as well that do have significant climate impact, but aren't thought of in that way. And then just quickly, since I'm a water person, whilst we do decarbonize, there's also implications, we need to look holistically at the solutions as well, So to make sure that while we're decarbonizing, while we're doing our other, climate work, to make sure that because sometimes what's good for carbon is bad for water, and it can lead to increased water. And textiles is an industry that's incredibly thirsty, dirty, and polluting. And now with the washing machines, we're releasing thousands and millions of microfibers and so on. So we need to be smart about it. That would be.
I just really appreciate that this forum, Matt and your team, we are able to gather people from all the different aspects of the efforts surrounding textile and fashion to come together and share our thoughts, because I definitely believe this is something that we have to take a holistic approach, a holistic view to achieve. It's not only the fabric mills, it's not only the brands, it's not only any other NGOs or think tanks. One single party can solve this problem. Actually, one of the most interesting takeaway I got from the working group discussions was a comment made by Kim Lee, one of the major fabric suppliers here in Singapore. They face the pressure to adopt more recycled materials because their customers from Europe, from the US, are urging them to use recycled materials. So as a brand, we definitely want to do our part to push the overall trend towards the right direction, but we need the customers to recognize and appreciate the kind of efforts that we're making, and that requires a wider and stronger awareness from the public. And this kind of awareness, we can expect the wider people to just think, oh, I want to go green today. It needs to be the efforts that come from the government, from the industry association, from everybody all together. So I hope we can continue our conversation on this. I'm optimistic, even though there are a lot of roadblocks. And I hope we can continue our conversation from here, and let's make a stronger impact.
I agree with Claudia. I'm very optimistic because right now I myself in the sector for not so long. I was actually coming from a B2B kind of setting. So I am very looking forward to drive positive change for fashion. And by looking at the the transformation of fashion right now, I really hope that one day we can actually proudly wear one net zero t-shirt, for example. And right now there are actually innovations called Costera. This Costera is actually a carbon dioxide absorption powder. So they can put the coating on your t-shirt, so meaning that you can actually wear one day, your t-shirt is functioning with its role, so absorbing the carbon dioxide. However, it will be so-called flow out together with a baking powder in your detergent. So it's more of a net positive kind of thinking rather than net zero. So it is futuristic, but it is also something that is possible. Costera. So I can actually look at some of the puzzle faces here. So it's actually a new innovation, but has not been scaled up yet. As we mentioned, we have a lot of innovations in the ecosystem, but just that, how do we get the right investor? How do we get the right finance institutions to invest into this type of innovation? I think that is really important. And my closing speech is, there are actually 4 levers we need to consider in order to scale the decarbonization in fashion. We need to have technologies, right? The technology that we mentioned just now. And we also need to have people for the know-how, that especially true for academic institutions, to contribute the know-how. And also we need a capital, right? Capital from our good friends. And also, last but not least, we need a very strong partnership across like different stakeholders in the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to say that, in fact, I would like to share After pandemic, there was drastic fall in the revenue of major brands. And that has led to, in fact, deprioritization of sustainability or decarbonization on their agenda. So that has a rippling effect in the supply chain. Because if you look at supply chain, I mean, tier 1, there are major tier 1s maybe, but tier 2, tier 3, you can't expect them to understand scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So what I feel is a good collaborative approach is required between brands and suppliers. There is good hand-holding and support is expected by suppliers and manufacturers there. So to drive this decarbonization agenda in the supply chain, to make it supply.
Great. So we have the QR code on the screen. If we can open up, I think we have time for a few questions. And I'll start with one that I am looking at for the first time, which is, what's the textile industry contribution to the percentage of carbon emissions? I'm going to guess that that's global carbon emissions, and I think if you include the transport and energy, I think it's 10%, but I'm going to ask. Karen's nodding at me, so I think that's correct. So, yeah, I think feel free to send in questions either through the app or to raise your hand for the mic. Yes.
Yeah, thanks to the panel. One question from my side is, how about the use of more organic materials like cotton, for example, instead of the use of man-made fibers? I mean, would that be a recommendation towards reducing the carbon footprint? Thank you.
I guess I can take on that. Yeah, definitely organic cotton is one of the things that I think the industry is shifting towards or try to adopt more. But it really depends on what type of clothing you're trying to make. So for regular everyday life t-shirts or maybe even shirts, you can definitely use cotton, organic cotton, and even the other alternative fabrics like bamboo or other, there are all sorts of new materials going on. But for our activewear business, it's still definitely the synthetic fabric, the polyester, nylon that is providing the best performance. We actually tested with some of the other alternative fabrics like bamboo performance fabric or something else. They do really, really bad in terms of stretching and recovery, and they do wick the sweat, but they take a long time to dry. So, when we are making clothing that use the cotton materials, or we can use the cotton materials, we definitely strive for the more organic or more environmental friendly ones, but still synthetic fabric is still yet replaceable on the market at this moment.
Super quickly, cotton for water is worse. So just an example of the trade-offs.
Also bamboo, it sounds very environmental friendly.
Yeah,
it takes a lot of water to process the bamboo into fabric.
And it has to be the right type of bamboo and, you know, the agriculture done in a way as well. Yeah.
I think we're back to the consensus before of complexity. I think another piece to this puzzle is that a lot of the other materials are basically petroleum products, and that's seen as a huge area of growth for the oil and gas companies in a kind of a net zero transition. So I think we're at about 100 million barrels of oil a day. Even in a net zero scenario, they're thinking about still having 20 million barrels in 2050, and that's basically plastics and petroleum-based chemicals, and largely including the fabric, the materials that go into textiles. And so I think there's difficult decisions kind of across a number of materials, but one other thing that came up in the discussion was if you are using organic material, you can begin to think about other nature-based solutions in the area where they're grown and co-benefits and other kind of innovations around that. So complex, but a lot to be done.
Hi, a question for the panel. Earlier on, you said there was lots of solutions for the retail industry, and there was a little bit of a laugh and a smirk, and there's loads and loads, but nothing's being done, or little is being done. Why is that the case, do you think, and what incentives need to be put in place to actually drive the industry as a whole? Is it money? Is it knowledge? Is it capital? Is it PR? Is it pressure from consumers, from other brands, et cetera, et cetera? What do you guys think?
I think it was the smirk was me. So I'll go first. No, it's fine. I think it's a little bit of everything that you've said. So a little bit the history of the fashion industry was, it was bumbling along fine, and then Greenpeace was like, this is an industry that's having a lot of impact. And they did a slew of reports, and it caught the public's attention, it caught investors' attention, it kind of pushed the industry to a precipice, like, you need to clean up, and become more sustainable across all fronts. And then a lot of the brands responded. There was a lot of negative PR, as you can imagine. So that's when a lot of them set their targets and things like that. But that was now 12-ish years ago, something like that. And so there was whenever something bad comes out, a lot of crisis management, and for 5 years, a lot of activity from the industry. And that started with the brands, and then that kind of went down into the manufacturers. And actually, so we did a lot of work in China, and you saw a lot of change in China in the factories. And actually, the government has also been cleaning up a lot. But then it's kind of fizzled, and then you get these piecemeal solutions. And I think that's a little bit one of the biggest obstacles is there's waterless dyes, there's a lot on the decarb front. There are platforms that look for waste, for like smaller brands. So like we have X amount of yards left over, who wants it at a low cost? But it's just nothing seems to be at big enough scale. And whether that's the competition and the really low cost, the low margins, that's my view. I don't know.
I think another piece is, we talked about the complexity. I think there's action to be taken throughout the supply chain, and that's what I would really leave everyone with. Whether it's fashion or apparel or another industry that you're involved in, think about what can you do on the consumer side, the supply chain side, the manufacturing side, the finance side, and that's what I would kind of leave everyone with, is hopefully this provides some inspiration to take away. But I think with that we're at time, and so I'll hand it back to Matt and the team.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so I have good news and I have bad news. So the bad news is there's still one more panel. Well, no, the bad news is the mic just went off. Let's see. That's neat. But let's see if we get one that works. Okay, we'll get one that works, good. So the bad news is that we have one more panel, and we're going to talk about things like derivative contracts. The good news is that the dean is coming to deliver her closing remarks at about 4:45. So we're going to be accelerating the pace of the financial innovations panel. So everybody who's joining me on the panel is like, oh, shucks. We have heard, as we've gone through today, a lot of talk about the pressure to decarbonize, or as Prof. Adams said, to reduce carbon emissions, right? Let's focus on it that way. And it needs money, right? We've got to put capital to work behind this. But where's it coming from? So everything from our keynote on, This has been a key theme. And as we did our work through the working groups, one of the things that we started thinking about is what are the financing techniques or innovations that are happening in different places around the world that we can bring together and share with you here. So this is not a we have recommendations kind of panel. This is we've done a little bit of a scan and identified some very interesting things happening in the world, and we want to share some of those with you here. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a classroom session and just summarize a couple of these things quickly, more quickly than I anticipated, and then we're going to get into our panel discussion. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what's called a carbon contract for difference. Now, contracts for differences have been around for a long time in financial markets. They are essentially this is a derivative contract based on the difference between two prices at a future date. And so when you apply this to a carbon market and a carbon price, what you're essentially doing is talking about a commercialization contract where today, and we've thought about this we've had green steel, green cement, we've had all the recycled plastic kind of materials going into textiles. You can say SAF is here. You can say green hydrogen is here. All of these things are really expensive to build out, right? It's a lot of CapEx. And right now, if there's a price on carbon in the world, it's too low relative to how much it costs to build these things and scale them. So if the EU market carbon price is 80 euros or something like that, the break-even carbon price, if you will, for some of these kinds of materials winds up being a multiple of that. So what you can do with a CCFD, and so excuse me if I use that abbreviation as we go through, what you can do is you can say, we're going to agree on a strike. I really want to point at this and it's not going to work. We can agree on a strike price, some sort of carbon price in the future, right, for any amount of this new material that we're going to deliver. And by agreeing to this price, and it can be fixed, it can be variable, it's a derivative contract, so you can structure it in many different ways. You basically are taking some of the price risk out of the investment decision. And you're basically saying, I'm going to fix some of this price risk so that I now know whether or not I can make this investment. Let me give you a couple of visuals to help make this a little clearer. So you can imagine here on this chart that goes through time on the x-axis, on the y-axis, some effective carbon price. You would have a company that wants to build, say, a green hydrogen plant, but it's really expensive. And so they could actually go to a counterparty. It might be a government, maybe it could be somebody else, or a consortium or what have you. And if the carbon price stays below an agreed level through time, maybe the funder, the backer, the government might make up the difference. Saying, we thought it was going to be 200, it wound up being 180. When it's below 200, we'll make up the difference. So you're getting paid as if it's 200. So you're taking the price risk off of the manufacturer. So they can build with confidence, hey, I know I can deliver my green hydrogen at an effective carbon price of 200. Now, maybe the price goes up to 250. And then what some contracts will do is they're not letting the manufacturer keep the windfall profits. They're actually saying, well, now pay the government back. We were on the other side of that. Carbon price went way up, so share some of that back with us. So it takes some of the pricing risk out and it enables the manufacturer to make that capital investment. So let's put some numbers on this for a second. So let's say we are using that green hydrogen example. There's an industrial business that wants to switch its production from natural gas to green hydrogen powered. And in this table here on the left, we're going to walk through what the math looks like. Over 10 years, and let's say that's the length of the CCFD, CapEx investment to create the green hydrogen might be $200 million. And that might translate to $70 per ton when you calculate how much hydrogen they're expecting to use. Okay, so let's say that that's the price. It's going to cost them $70 a ton in CapEx. Then it's going to cost them another $30 per ton in OpEx. You know, it still requires energy, it's, you know, whatever the other operating costs are for that plant. So your total incremental cost over conventional technology, regular hydrogen, over natural gas, in this example, is $100 a ton. 70 from OpEx, from CapEx, 30 from OpEx. But today, we're going to try to figure out what is that switch worth. And so we look at the amount of CO2 that you're going to save, the reduction in emissions. And here, in this example, it's 1.2, that was, it was tons of CO2 per ton of the material, I think, if I remember the example correctly. And so if you divide the 1.2 over 100, so that's, or 100 over 1.2, that means that your cost to abate, to reduce emissions, is $83.3 per ton of CO2. So if the current market price is $25, you'll never make that investment because it's cheaper to just go ahead and pollute and pay the carbon cost in the market, right? So what you're hoping is that you still want to encourage people to make the investment so that they can reduce their emissions, but you need to recognize that their cost is going to be $83. So what you might do is you might set up a contract, a CCFD, that says the price that we guarantee is $83.3. That's the fixed price. If the market price goes up but it stays below 83.3, the government subsidy will go ahead and make it up to you. And if it goes above that, maybe you pay the revenue back. So conceptually, sorry, this is 4:35 after sitting in the room for a long time. So conceptually, what we're trying to do is take price risk away and transfer that risk to somebody else. So there are a bunch of these in process. I know this is going to be too small for you to probably see here in the room. If you're online, you might be able to see it actually more easily. And there's a lot of work being done in Europe, right? Some of the original CFD applications in this market were actually in the electricity markets. In the UK, they've used this a lot. And they're starting to use this now for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Denmark, there's an ICC contract in the UK. In Canada, they're doing something like this. And then they're just getting up and running in the Netherlands and, interestingly, in Germany. And I'm going to highlight in Germany because whereas the other ones are really focused on a lot of carbon capture and utilization and storage, in Germany, their new system that they're just getting up and running is all eligible industrial sectors. So it has much broader applications. So you can imagine it applying to something like SAF if you wanted to go there. And so when we start thinking about where could you apply this, just simply, if you think about what your kind of technology pathway is in some of these, whether it's building supplies or other things, at about 80 euros per ton, you're right around break even for some work in cement, maybe green ammonia for shipping as well, getting close there. Green hydrogen, much higher, and then green steel, much, much higher. So this is the backdrop that we have. And we're trying to think, okay, so where could you take something like CCFDs and apply them here in ASEAN? What are the pros and cons? Does this make sense? So the pros we get a long-term price hedge. We might be able to therefore speed up the adoption of low-carbon technologies by increasing their investment attractiveness, which would reduce the financing costs. It becomes a cost-effective option for governments, essentially, because you're going to get something out of this. You're going to have, now all of a sudden, you're going to have green hydrogen production in your country, and that is good for your country, right? If that's in your neighborhood. And we spoke with somebody associated with the World Bank who highlighted the fact that actually there are knock-off effects on this, or knock-on effects, I should say. So if you were able to get some funding for green hydrogen, now imagine that passes into green fertilizers, right? You get into the ammonia cycle, you get into the fertilizer cycle, right? So having some of these basic materials funded in this way actually now unlocks some of the green demand. Oh, I want to do green fertilizers, I need green ammonia. I have a contract for green fertilizers. You've now instantly created guaranteed demand for green ammonia. How are you going to get green ammonia? You're going to go back up into green hydrogen, things like that. So it's systemic in nature. So it sounds great, but yeah, there are cons as well. So we have these examples. They're carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Maybe they're in electricity markets. Are those things actually comparable to the basic materials we're talking about here? We need to do more work to understand that. You need a counterparty with a long-term perspective, right? So if we go back here, these are developed market governments, and yeah, who's going to be on the other side of one of these contracts? If this is all we're really going to get to work with, governments on the other side, how easy is that to do that here in ASEAN? Maybe not all that easy, right? The accurate measurement and reporting of the carbon emissions is actually extremely important because you have to have the data that tells you this is the cost per ton, this is how much emissions I'm saving. If I don't have that data, then how much do I trust this? So you need to have that. This was one comment again from the World Bank. The good thing about doing this in the EU is you've got all these regulations now that are requiring companies to track and measure and report this. So that kind of creates the underlying environment for this kind of contract to be successful. And then how do you price it, right? How'd they get 83.3? I know the math, but is that the right price? Who wants to be on the other side of that? And what do you do here in ASEAN where we don't, we in Singapore have a carbon price. It is too narrowly applied and too low, but we have one, but our neighbors don't yet. Some are developing, but they're going to start low. What do you do? How broadly could you roll this out? Do you get a price by looking at some other market? Do you get a price by looking at voluntary carbon markets? So, we have to think, are there counterparties we could look at here? We've got some examples, governments. Maybe we could expand this to non-governments in some way. Think about other reference prices to use. If you're working on something that's in a market that's affected by CBAM or another one of these border adjustment mechanisms, you're already tied to the price in your export market, so that could be interesting. So we're trying to figure out exactly where we go with this. But that's just CCFDs. We kind of got excited about that one and wanted to share more about it, but there are lots of other ideas under development in different parts of the world. So advanced market agreements. If the issue is how do I have security in demand? I know that if, field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. If you build this plant, will you guarantee that you're going to buy a certain amount of this green material at a price? So an advanced market agreement is a guarantee for future demand to support the longer-term capital investments. A contract for availability. This is being used in the CCS market. A public-private partnership funding model could be something, it's used in lots of other applications. Could it apply here to help build some of these big basic material kind of manufacturing facilities? There are different market-based mechanisms that are like tradable certificates and things of that nature. We've got transition credits, which is something that's being worked on here by MAS around the phase-out of coal-fired power plants in the region, so traction is one of their initiatives. And then, in Australia, they have this carbon abatement contract, which basically allows you to sell back into the government if you have a known way of reducing your emissions. So there's a lot of innovation on the funding side. We're going to do a now shorter discussion than I anticipated, and I'll invite my panelists here to come join me, and then we'll do like probably a one time around the group now that I told you the good news was the dean was coming at 4:45, right? So why don't I invite up my panelists. We have Mr. Andy Yap from ERM, Mr. Jasper Wong from UOB, and then my colleagues Daniel Lee and Simba Chung from NBS. So gentlemen, why don't you join me here? And I guess what we really want to talk about is, as we think about this, this idea, let's start with the CCFDs. And maybe Andy, I'll ask you to chime in on this one first. We've kind of learned about what it is, what it means, and there are lots of pros, but there are lots of challenges here in ASEAN. What's your take and your experience about whether or not this could get up and running here in some form, and what that might take?
Sure, Matthew. So I think what I'm about to share is probably very anecdotal and my own personal experience, because I've not been involved in the actual CCFD arrangement. But I think clearly any derivative contract requires the underlying asset to be fairly liquid, fairly credible, because you're basically putting your trust in something that you can, in the event, not fulfill the requirements down the road, you still have the underlying asset as a potential hedge. So on that grounds, in ASEAN, there needs to be at least a clear understanding of what the underlying asset is, whether it is a equivalent carbon offset price on a compliance, preferably a compliance market led offset that could be a reference point, or it could be a carbon tax that, for example, Singapore has articulated. So with that, there is at least a strong basis of comparison. But clearly also that underlying technology that potentially needs that price risk to be taken out long term has to be aligned with the ASEAN national decarbonization strategy. So something like hydrogen and CCS could fit well into that bucket, and accordingly you have seen some of the examples that are really along those lines. Because anyway the government is vested in accelerating these technologies, so they already have an inherent view on it, and they're willing to take the price risk to stomach that risk long term. Yeah, so I think really comes down to the underlying asset and the peripheral frameworks, the peripheral taxonomies that guide the reference asset. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Jasper, so traditional banking, right? This is where people go, right? If you want to finance things, today you go to the financial system. What makes it so hard to get funding for these kinds of investments?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, man. I think I'm in the hot seat today. We're all talking about money, and just give you a bit of context, right? What we're talking about CCFD, the contract for differences is not new, right? We have contract for differences in the electricity market, which is very stable and common, but yet in Singapore, we don't have the long-term market yet. We can do 90 days, we can do 6 months, but going out further out, you really need to have a very strong summer or very strong balance sheet, which is actually happens 2 years ago when the retail market started unwinding, and that was the issue because the retailer go fixed price on us, which is fantastic for the end user, but they kept the other end open, right? So they were subject to fluctuation on the other side. So very apt example is what's happening in Singapore. If you look at the derivatives or what do you call it, the interest rate derivative, just take for example, right? Globally, yearly the trading market is about $700 trillion. US dollar interest rate swap, it's about 168 trillion. What we are just starting off on carbon credits is about 15, 20, 30 billion. Small, but I think it will need, like Andy said, the fundamentals needs to be there so that we know that somebody is standing behind. We used to have a electricity trading desk in Singapore. Of course, now the market is almost dead. So where do we go from here, right? That's the question. Everybody wants to find out, hey, how can I hedge my carbon risk, right? I mean, we know that the government, Singapore government has had a very good example. We go from what, $5 to 25, 2026 we're looking at what, 45 maybe, and then 2030 is about 50 to 80. Now, question is, if you're looking at what the government is setting out, then you should be thinking that, hey, I should be in the money, right? If I know where the market is going. But however, if you think about it, the government is also now trying to import 2 gigawatts of low carbon electricity, to be exact. Then you will start wondering, right? So if the low carbon electricity starts to come in, then what happened to the carbon price, right? So there's a lot of consideration that is not really a one-way bet, right? It's not so certain. So from that perspective, I think banks is also worry about risk, and we should be, right, because we're protecting the public's money in terms of how we do the investment, how we do our trades. So the question is, where do we go, right? My sense is that we should look at the REX market, which is a single type, very sort of homogeneous, because if you look at whether it's solar or wind, geothermal, mini hydro maybe, and these are quite homogeneous in terms of how you calculate, how you record, how you do your metering, and then that's where you can start learning a bit more. We have been talking to IREX and in terms of how they're doing their trade, but even in the renewable energy market, you don't have long-term trading market, which we are trying to work with them to see if there is opportunity for us to create a market from that sense. So we are in the curbs of starting off. I think the other point is also, even carbon credits for Singapore, you can only offset 5% of your emissions. So that's very limited. The thing is that we do need the government to come in to help drive the compliance market. And also in ASEAN, I think we need to work together as one. Unfortunately now that in the REX market, that there seems to be a arbitrage market. I think somebody asked that question, because Singapore now, if you go to the REX market, people are buying around $40 per rack. That's one rack is 1 megawatt hour. If you go to Vietnam, if you go to Thailand, if you go to around the region, the price is like $1 to $5, right? So you can see there's a huge difference. But however, if you go with the RE100 convention, you cannot really take advantage of that because you need to have connectivity. So there are a lot of issues that we can think about, and we can solve them. But to me, ultimately, is the need for the hedging instrument, and plus the buyers who are willing to pay for it. Yeah.
Yeah, these are not actually new issues, right? I mean, these are the common issues that we have to wrestle with in finance all the time. It's risk and price. I mean, Simba, from the academic perspective, like as we think about, we're talking about a derivative contract to help fund this. Like, what can we learn from what's already been done and studied?
I guess I will make this session even more academic. When it comes to pricing, I think the pricing of CCFD is not really well discussed or well studied relative to other aspects, such as the mechanisms, benefits. I think maybe there's a reason for under discussion. Could be related to, for example, if you can view this CCFD as an insurance product. Essentially, government is providing insurance, protecting these project developers against carbon risk. So government is on the other side. And of course, government is hoping that if the carbon price keep rising, in the end, they don't need to pay anything, right? So it also makes sense because government is assuming the risk, but at the same time, government control the factors affecting the risk. So it's actually a perfect match, which is good arrangement. But of course, we know that things may not go according to government's plan. In the end, maybe we have a carbon oversupply and the carbon price may drop. In that case, of course, the project developer will be paid. So this insurance is valuable. No insurance is free, so it should be priced. But how to price it? Actually, I guess it's not that hard because we can view this CCFD as a put option. right? So this project developer will have the right to sell the carbon credit or carbon savings to government at a strike price. Then we can use, for example, the Black-Scholes formula. It's very like an intimidating formula to do the pricing. So you need is risk-free rate, you need carbon prices, you need a strike price, you need a time to maturity, and you can do the calculation. So it can be priced, it should be priced. Once it can be priced properly, then we should have a market for it. And hopefully, in the near future, we can have CCFD market, and they'll have buyers who are the project developers and the seller. Right now, the sellers are governments, but in the future, I hope we can have, for example, insurance company providing this insurance, taking the risk, and on the other side of the risk transferring or risk sharing. And once we have a market, then we can attract private capital into this instrument, into this market. So if we have more private capital, in the end, of course, this whole financial innovation will have bigger impact on the real economy, on environment, also on the entire society. So I truly believe this financial innovation is very creative. It can have a huge impact. Conditional on, it can be properly priced and traded in the market.
Thank you. That was great. I don't think that was too academic, right? I mean, at 5 o'clock, we're okay? Okay. I'm going to try to accelerate us, and so I'm going to declare that this is the last question. And Daniel, I want to come to you. And I think in the interest of time, because we're running late, let's see if we have any Q&A. But otherwise, we may skip. I think my question, Daniel, for you is, I mean, so we're talking about CCFDs, right? But there's also was a long list of other things. So if we're thinking about how do we unblock the capital that is needed to make these big investments for green materials, say, how does that fit with carbon markets, carbon credits, whether it's voluntary, the traction work? What's your understanding of the applicability of the carbon markets to, or carbon credits, I should say, to this investment problem?
Thanks, Matt. I think maybe answer in two parts, right? I guess from my background, what I've seen is for new facilities or new infrastructure investment, classically, sort of a put option on government is helpful, right? So even when, and this is not green technology, but when they were trying to construct the LNG terminal in Singapore, trying to get contracts through EMA allowed for vesting contracts at the time, right? So basically some sort of demand from natural gas. But if you think about how transition credits or attractions, the coalition that MES kind of sponsors in Singapore, there the role is slightly inverse. It's not about trying to create new infrastructure, it's trying to phase out existing infrastructure, if you will. So the central thesis there is that coal-fired power generation accounts for 20-30% global emissions. But the reality is that these CFPPs, if you can use the acronym, typically have a lifespan of about 40-50 years. But in Asia, the average lifespan of the CFPPs are below 15 years. So if we don't do anything, essentially that emissions profile is kind of locked in for several decades to come. And the idea there was that, through a blend of concessional capital, through a blend of commercial capital, you'll be able to get this blended finance outcome to phase out this coal-fired power generation while keeping the shareholders whole. Then they embarked on an interesting idea, which is, well, there's only so much concessional capital that's available. How do we step up? How do we expand and scale this? And they said, well, if I look at the criteria or what I'm trying to do, phasing out existing coal-fired power generation, which is nowhere near the end of its operational life, I can make arguments around how that is additional. I can make arguments around how those reductions are permanent. And with the right planning, I can ensure that there's no leakage and also facilitate renewable energy generation, for example, to replace the coal-fired power generation. And so I take those key ingredients, mix them in some magic soup of methodology, and I could come out with an idea that I could issue carbon credits that are high integrity. And if we could get demand for those high integrity carbon credits, let's call them transition credits, then you additionally are able to finance more of these coal-fired power plants or bring some of the early retirement even earlier. So very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, MES has sort of like mentioned 2 pilot projects in the region, both in the Philippines. One is in Luzon, one's in Mindanao. The one in Luzon, through some arrangements with the ADB and some of the pension funds, insurance funds in Philippines, have already come to a conclusion where they would bring forward the retirement of the existing power plant. It's a 246 baseload coal-fired power plant in Luzon, from its end of life, say 40 years, to 25 years. And that 25-year point in time is 2040. Now what ASEAN Corporation is doing, which is a part of the Ayala Group, is they're trying to work with stakeholders to say, hey, can I bring it even earlier? Can I bring it from 2040 to 2030? So retire at the 15-year mark. And to do that, they are trying to generate or get some carbon credits issued. And they've already made those first few steps. So that's in a nutshell kind of the whole transition credit story.
Very interesting. But if I go back to kind of voluntary carbon markets, right? If there is an abatement that comes up if you're building out, a SAF plant or something like that, do you feel like voluntary credits are actually going to be an effective way to finance those kinds of investments?
I think so. So especially if you look at some of the technology credits, if you will. So, direct air capture is a favorite example. Or, the less high-tech sort of biochar facilities. You get companies who maybe some business models are to generate and sell those credits in and of itself, right? And those, what we call carbon dioxide removals or CDRs, have a market actually. And, of course, the pricing is a lot more higher than your classic, cook stoves or forest conservation. But actually, if you look at some of the international guidance like SBTI and some of these best practices, there's a lot of focus on more permanent removals, and that's maybe more resilient in terms of demand. So certainly, you're getting the voluntary carbon market as an example here, as a tool to kind of finance these technologies, and hopefully they scale. We've seen some investments, or I've seen some investments where they're in companies that not only produce carbon credits, but they're doing something else. So for example, there's a company that through some processes with seawater is able to sequester and remove methane as well as carbon and generate some sort of synthetic replacement for plastic. So, and this material is then used for straws, for example. So, you can imagine all the fast food companies are going berserk, like, give it to me, right? Because not only do I replace plastic, I also sequester methane, I also sequester carbon dioxide. That's their main product. On top of that, then they sell carbon credits. So you can see this kind of innovation happening, and that voluntary carbon market definitely can play a complementary tool to help financing.
That's fascinating. The amount of innovation that's happening in this space right now is really incredible. The challenge is, of course, we've got to scale it up much more quickly than it already is. As I've noted, we are definitely over time. Why don't we do this? If there is one pithy question in the audience, we have a question here. Maybe we can grab, here, take mine.
Thank you for the interesting discussion. So when we were thinking about CCFDs, striking the price is also a political decision because it matters about which company is going to get the funding and which is not going to. And if the price strike is decided by the government, that's a political decision. What gives an insurance, as you were putting up in the future, that power to make political and strategic decision for a country?
Yeah, great question. So I guess the one thing that we observed in the Germany example is they actually had an auction. So rather than, so it's competitive bids from the companies, right? So they are going out the government is going out to the companies and saying, we are looking forward to funding these kinds of projects, give me your bids. So it's actually taking that political risk off the table, which was quite interesting. Now, what kind of bids are you getting? How do you know you're going to be successful? Yeah, I think it's early days, and they just completed the bidding round, I think in end of July, right? And so they haven't released any of the results yet. But it will be interesting to see how they used an auction process to navigate that political risk. Thank you for the question. Okay, so please, thank you to my panelists. And with that, we'll turn it back over to our MCs and get ready to wrap up. Still not working.
Still not working?
Oh,
now it's working. Okay, so we have reached the final segment for our event, and now I would like to invite Associate Professor Cindy Deng, Co-Director of the Center for Sustainable Finance Innovation, to conclude and introduce our final speaker for today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to say thank you for staying with us until now. And as we approach the end of this forum, I just want to take a moment to express our greatest gratitude for all the peoples who contribute to this forum, to our distinguished panelists, speakers who inspiring us to think harder, like all these challenges and opportunities along the journey, and to all the remaining work group members and our research team. In the past 3 months, you worked so hard and which laid the ground for today's rich discussion. And then, of course, for our MCs who have done many works as RAs, much more than what you'll see today. And then our supporting staffs, Max, Angela, and probably they are outside, and many other colleagues. And lastly, the most important person, Matt. And initially, Matt said this is a crazy idea. It turns out he is the person who worked most crazily in the past 3 months and to make it such a success. Okay, so now I have the greatest pleasure to invite our dean, the chair professor in finance, Professor Jun Yang, on stage to give us the closing remarks. Please join me welcoming Jun.
Thank you, everyone. I know you've done a great, amount of work this afternoon to be part of this important forum. I'm new to Singapore. This is my 2nd month. So this is where we connect the East with the West, and this is where we see the activities. I feel really happy to see all of you here working together, discussing the most important issues in the world. I've spent 25 years in the US. I think now, especially for the next 20 years, Singapore and the ASEAN countries are playing a very critical role in affecting the growth and the future, not only of this region, but also the rest of the world. What we discuss here today is going to be important for the future of this earth, that is not only for ourselves, but also for our children and our children's children. So as the dean, I need to say a few things about the school. So NBS, Nanyang Business School, is a premier business school within a world-class technological universities. So we have top-class research. Also, we care about the impact. We want to contribute to solving these most emerging as well as long-lasting challenging problems, right? Climate risk is one of them. I'm very happy to see many of you, either from the industry, from the government, and from the scholastic world. We're working together on solving these most challenging, but the most important issues that we are facing, not only for now, but also for the next 5, 10, or 20 years. So today's forum also shows our commitment, the commitment of Nanyang Business School as well as NTU to our the commitment to solve these critical problems. And we're trying to help to connect industry professionals and to connect and develop sustainability-minded community. Actually, we've just launched one executive master program early this month. I was giving the welcoming speech 2 weeks ago. That is a master program executive master program in sustainability management. The inaugural class already has more than 40 professionals coming from different industries. Their average work experiences is more than 10 years. So they are in charge of many critical decisions that are related what we talked today. At the meantime, we have a town hall meeting tomorrow here at NBS. We're launching a public lecture series co-hosted with United Nations Principal Responsible Investment, UNPRI, as well as European Corporate Governance Institute. This is a public lecture series on sustainability-related issues. So there we're going to connect, again, scholars with policymakers with money, because UNPRI has connections to 1,400 mutual funds, pension funds, sovereign funds, and many large institutions. They can direct financial resources towards solving the most urgent and important questions we're all facing together. So NBS is fully committed. So please keep us in your contact list. We're going to send information to announce these events, and I hope to see your participation in later events, either as a speaker, as a moderator, or just to dial in to share your thoughts with us. In closing, I think Xin said a lot. I do want to thank everybody, including the ones who are not on the organizing committee. I think crazy ideas are great because we are facing so many challenges. Crazy means we are creative, we're entrepreneurial. With all these questions, we need new solutions. We need to be bold. Of course, we all manage risk, right? When we're being bold, we need to control the downside risk. But I think this is a good starting point. We're gathered to discuss all these issues, even though we don't have all the solutions. We see constraints, we see disconnects of different things scattered around different parts of the world. But that makes this discussion more meaningful and more important. So I'm very proud to be a partner, to partner with all of you in this journey. And on behalf of NBS, I wish you every success in your own and our collective decarbonization ventures. I want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a pleasant lunch, dinner, and enjoy the company of each other. Thank you very much.
So thank you everyone for being part of today's forum, and we hope you have gathered some useful information to bring back to your companies. And before you leave, please fill out this survey. We want to hear your thoughts, and we want to also hear how to make this forum more useful for you and your organization. With that, we wish you a great evening ahead. Thank you and goodbye.